What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, January 2nd, 2019, first radio show of the new year, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, including that. Looking forward to the next year here. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. So, as we look into the new year, there's a lot of people out there making prognostications, and unfortunately, the tone of most of them is decidedly negative. People are not feeling all that hopeful, and apparently James Howard Kunstler, who's an author, is saying that he's expecting there will be civil disorder in 2019. And apparently, Kunstler contributes to the Atlantic Monthly, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times Sunday magazine, and he's saying that there will be civil unrest over the coming 12 months. He says there's a lot of angry people around the country, and they're liable to attack federal property and their fellow citizens and their property. The hungrier they get, the worse it will be. So he's basically tying this to the coming economic collapse. And by the way, there's a lot of people who are saying that's going to happen this year. So, it's not a very positive outlook here, and unfortunately I tend to agree with that here. If you disagree, feel free to call on in here. Now, interestingly enough, over on the Hill, they came out with a page of predictions which included Donald Trump leaving office this year, and that a new and totally unexpected candidate for 2020 will emerge this year as well. And it goes on to say that basically the global and U.S. economies are trying to soften that unnecessary trade war that Trump launched against Canada and our European allies. Consumer confidence is declining, and the American economy will slow noticeably in 2019. A recession is right around the corner heading into 2020. Yes, the economies all over the world are already slowing down, we're seeing. And where we saw it was the recent holiday shopping season. And every year they play the same game. Oh, the shoppers are out there. We better rush and get your bargains, just to flog you into the malls. Now that it's all over and the numbers are coming on out, was not good at all. People just don't have money to buy stuff. And most people don't want to use that plastic. So it was a very, very thin Christmas. Now, Donald Trump last week shocked everybody with his announcement that he wanted to pull all of the U.S. troops out of Syria. Was going to continue the air campaign, but wanted to pull all of the troops from Syria. Allies called him, Netanyahu called him, and Trump was holding firm. But apparently following a meeting with Senator Lindsey Graham, Trump did an about-face and said the withdrawal is going to be gradual and it's going to be phased, and I'm a little disappointed. I'm a little disappointed, and I understand there were very powerful forces at work against the pullout of the troops from Syria, because they see a pullout, pardon me, as tantamount to an admission of defeat. And if the U.S. is seen to have lost in Syria and Afghanistan, then the inertia, if you will, the momentum for the war agenda comes to a screeching halt. So basically, we've lost in Syria. Trump lost in Syria. Trump knows we've lost in Syria. We lost in Syria before Trump became president. But apparently somebody impressed on him. He did not want to be the president that admitted we had lost in Syria. Now, if you remember back to the Pentagon Papers, the shocking revelation that really upset America was that the Department of Defense had known they were going to lose in Vietnam for years before the war was finally over. And it was just a case of president after president after president who didn't want to have to be the president that lost that war. until we got chased out of Saigon with a dozen Marines hanging underneath the helicopter. And by the way, that movie that they've made about that, called simply The Post, and it's Tom Hanks, it mentions that. It talks about the Pentagon Papers. More about that a little bit later. So, pardon me. Some people were looking at the Syria withdrawal and wondering what was Trump's motive over and above keeping what was one of his major campaign promises to we the American people. But apparently, Trump's enthusiasm for Israel is a little bit strained. Apparently, he's having sort of problems with Sheldon Adelson. And basically, Trump overrode John Bolton, his neoconservative security advisor, in announcing the withdrawal. And Jonathan Tobin says that Trump just gave the finger to his Jewish voters. But I think what may be happening here is that Trump was counting on Adelson's money to keep the House Republican in the midterms, and Adelson let him down. And I think Trump is letting him know it. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. But the rules are changing in Syria. And despite talk of a pullout, reports are saying the United States is planning to establish new military bases in Syria, despite Trump's announcement of troop withdrawal from the country. He's clearly not in charge, unfortunately. He's turned out to be a very, very weak leader. And U.S. forces were in Syria for years without the consent of the Syrian government. They still don't have it. But now the government forces have gained the upper hand in the fight against the foreign-backed, including U.S.-backed, terrorists. We're getting this report. This is from Fars News. The U.S. Army is continuing to send military hardware into eastern Syria despite the call for a pullout. So at this point, I don't think there's going to be a pullout. There'll be regular troop rotations home, and they'll be greeted like returning heroes. But somebody convinced Donald Trump it was a bad idea. And he's probably going to cancel out on pulling half of our troops out of Afghanistan. Now, Bashar al-Assad has involved Iraq in the ongoing war. And at Assad's request, Iraqi jets strike terrorists. And apparently, the two allies are coordinating action against the remaining ISIS pockets in the country's east. So now Iraq is stepping in, again, with the permission and invitation of Bashar al-Assad. Now, Mike Pompeo apparently yesterday discussed Iran's, quote, regional aggression with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This was a State Department press release. And apparently Pompeo met with Netanyahu in Brasilia, Brazil, and they discussed the unacceptable threat that regional aggression and provocation by Iran and its agents poses to Israel and regional security. No mention of Israel's and the United States' regional aggressions, of course, because they're supposed to be the good guys. Okay. Anyway, Pompeo wound up assuring Netanyahu that the U.S. is committed to the protection of Israel, even following the withdrawal from Syria, which I'm willing to bet a plug nickel is not going to happen anytime soon. Here's my point. Here's my question. Israel has a modern, huge military, which you paid for a big chunk of it, and they have nuclear weapons. Why do they need the United States as a protector? They're more than capable of fighting their own wars. And Iran is not coming to attack Israel because Israel's response would be a giant mushroom cloud over Tehran. But it does look like Netanyahu wants to force something, because apparently on Monday, Netanyahu said that Arab countries see Israel as an indispensable ally to fight Iran and the jihadist group ISIS. So he's basically talking about a revolution in relations with the Arab world. Now Netanyahu wants to make nice with all the other nations in the Middle East, except, of course, for Iran. And apparently Israel has intensified airstrikes on Iranian positions in Syria. And they're still dealing with Trump's call for a pullout. But as I said earlier in the show, it looks like he's been talked out of it now. Okay, so up in Afghanistan, apparently Afghan strike forces being overseen by CIA are operating with apparently no concern about civilian casualties. This came out of the New York Times, and the brutality has fostered local population sympathy for the Taliban, which we mentioned that a month ago. The population of Afghanistan sides with the Taliban. So the CIA managed teams work unconstrained by battlefield rules designed to protect civilians, conducting night raids, torture, and killing with near impunity. And of course, those abuses are actively pushing people towards the Taliban and away from the U.S. installed government. Sounds rather counterproductive to me. Apparently, the Taliban has killed at least 27 security officers. We're not really sure what that means. But they were killed during a series of coordinated attacks in the north of Afghanistan. The deadliest attack took place in Sari-i-Pul province, where 21 were killed. Alrighty, over in France, and probably the corporate media was trying to downplay it, but the yellow vests were back in full force for Act 7 of the protests. And their protests now include the lying press and Macron's past history as a banker. Apparently they're concerned that he's still a money junkie. Over in Asia, pardon me, Xi Jinping is saying Taiwan must and will be reunited with China. And he's urging the people of Taiwan to just accept it. And in a speech marking 40 years since the start of trying to improve ties, he reiterated Beijing's call for peaceful unification on a one country, two systems basis. However, he also warned that China reserved the right to use force. Now, Taiwan is self-governed and de facto independent, but it has never formally declared independence from mainland China. Beijing considers Taiwan to be a breakaway province, and Xi's comments are in line with China's long-standing policies toward reunification. Now, at the same time Xi Jinping is ramping things up there, he's turning around and talking to Donald Trump about trying to strengthen U.S.-China bilateral ties. And apparently the two leaders yesterday exchanged congratulatory messages on the 40th anniversary of the establishment of China-U.S. diplomatic relations. It was all the way back, again, Nixon. And President Xi said he attached great importance to the development of bilateral ties, stressed he was willing to work with Trump in improving the Beijing-Washington relations. Well, that is going to be a real trick because of the tariff wars, and they're already talking about additional tariffs. The United States clearly siding with and aiding Taiwan on their issue of independence, and the argument over the South China Sea, and pouring more fuel on the fire, pardon me, a Chinese admiral, Rear Admiral Luo Yuan, has come on out and said that if China were to sink 2 U.S. supercarriers, that would probably end the spat. Now, that is very alarming rhetoric to be coming on out. But basically, Admiral Yuan was talking about China's growing anti-ship and cruise missile capabilities, which can now get past the carrier's escorts. They just fielded that one. It's a sea-skimming anti-ship missile, goes at Mach 6, and it is maneuverable. And the Admiral may be aware that while the United States has a lot of carriers, most of them are in dock for repairs or refitting or refueling. And there aren't that many that are actually in active service right now. Another story coming out of Russia today, analysts are saying that the U.S. is stalling the possibility of North Korea denuclearization by refusing to make concessions. And basically, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, in his New Year's address, to stop dallying and make trustworthy steps and corresponding behavior in response to his goodwill and the gestures North Korea had made. So, whoever is advising Donald Trump on handling North Korea does not really comprehend the Asian mindset, or they don't want this thing to ever work out. Okay. Here's another interesting little article from Zero Hedge, and it's talking about NATO and how NATO has been a very bad behaving military. They don't have the equivalent of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They're supposed to. They're supposed to be international laws. But apparently, NATO and the U.S. military's practice of desecrating corpses, attacks on wedding parties, mosques, hospitals, and marketplaces, along with the bombing of Allied troops, torture of prisoners, and the notoriously uncountable drone warfare are outrages that are taking place in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and Somalia. And 20 years worth of this so-called collateral damage is not making us any friends in the war zones. Now, Raytheon has announced that they have been awarded a $200 million contract by the United States Army for the Phalanx LPWS, which is a land-based version of the Phalanx that you see on naval warships. And it's, as you've probably seen in demonstration videos, it's a rapid-fire, computer-controlled, radar-guided gun that can detect and destroy incoming aircraft, artillery, mortar rounds, and rockets in the air before they hit their intended land-based targets, as long as they're as long as they're following a predictable ballistic trajectory. Meanwhile, China has debuted its electromagnetic railgun. It is now at sea. They mounted it on a Chinese amphibious assault ship, and there are pictures of it, videos of it in operation. And it looks to be quite potent. Russia, meanwhile, has debuted the latest version of their T-80 tank. It's called the T-80BVM. Was developed in 2017, and apparently some of the new improvements to it is an autoloader, allowing it to use new anti-tank ammo, Svitnets 1 and Svitnets 2 740 millimeter rounds. And apparently they are made from depleted uranium, or at least an alloy that includes depleted uranium. Alrighty, when we come back from this next commercial break, we're going to talk about domestic politics because it is getting ugly out there. And we're going to be talking about Mitt Romney's op-ed and the backlash that's produced. So we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get into this little kerfuffle between Donald Trump and Mitt Romney, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, Happy New Year. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I hope your New Year was good, Mike.
Well, it was mostly restful. I mean, we just kind of stayed home. And there were a lot of illegal fireworks, though, going off. So it was pretty spectacular.
Did you hide under your bed when Strategic Command announced like something about nukes going off? You heard about that, right?
No, actually, I didn't.
They had some kind of Twitter they put out. There was some kind of reprimand going on, but they showed, remember that test footage of the B-2 Spirit dropping those multiple bombs?
Yep.
The other day? Well, it says like something New Year's Eve nuke or something like that. I mean, something stupid. It makes you scared, Mike, to like wonder who's running like this whole thing anymore. Like to put out something like that, if you were in like a corporation, you would get fired.
Well, it's notoriously easy to hack a Twitter account and pose as somebody else.
Well, they came out and they apologized though.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was a dumb thing to do.
Hey, Mike, with Trump, did the Roman centurions get burnt out from all the wars? Because our troops got it. I mean, they don't believe in this crap anymore, the majority of them. And like with Trump flip-flopping, I mean, even his own supporters, because I don't support him anymore, got to be saying, wait a minute, you said you're going to pull, now you're not pulling out. And then, 60 days from now, it's better to pull out now and then wait 60 days and say you're going to pull out, because you know what? They'll go after him 60 days from now. If he pulls out now, 60 days from now, everybody's going to be moved on to another issue. He's dragging this out on himself.
Well, he may be dragging it out. He may be dragging it out to help Netanyahu. He's got a tough election coming up here, first part of April, and Trump may want Netanyahu to be able to say, yes, I got the United States to keep the Americans in Syria to keep us protected, or some such nonsense as that. But again, Trump is proving himself to be a very weak leader. And
But
Go ahead.
It's your show.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Mike, he's losing face, though, with the troops. I mean, Netanyahu is more important than our own troops.
Yes.
And his own people who voted for him. Because the troops are going to be saying, wait a minute, man. You said we're getting pulled out. Now you're stabbing us in the back. I mean, come on. Yeah, that's a bunch of crap, Yeah, and you're right. Israel's got its own military. Like, we don't have to be over in the Middle East at all.
Yeah, Israel's got nuclear weapons. Everybody knows it. None of those countries are going to attack Israel because, Israel would put a mushroom cloud over their capital city.
And if Israel was smart, they can make deals with Iran and begin trading with them because, Iran's got a lot more to offer than Saudi Arabia in terms of, trading with stuff that they make and this or that. I mean, Saudi Arabia don't really make anything but oil, right?
Well,
which they don't make at all.
Oil been very, very good to Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia is doing a lot of real estate development. They're building up their cities over there. They want to become business centers when the oil runs out.
And Mike, I don't know if you heard this. Did you hear that the U.S. is thinking about giving, you ready for this, Ukraine Harpoon anti-ship missiles? Now, unless they're land-based, they ain't got that many ships like in the Ukrainian Navy. So I don't know about that one.
Well, if they're giving the harpoons to Kiev, then obviously the intended targets are going to be Russian warships.
Yeah, there you go. And this talk about Ukraine wants a nuclear weapon. You realize that would never happen because Russia would just have to go in there and take them out at that point because they would never allow Ukraine with that government to have ever a nuclear weapon right next to them. And you know what's scary, Mike? They have 18 nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Chernobyl was only one. A lot of people don't know they have 18 nuclear reactors. And you know what's scary? Can they turn any of that waste into some kind of a dirty bomb? That's another worry.
Well, they can turn it into regular nuclear weapons. I mean, if it's a standard uranium fission reactor, what they're getting out the bottom end of it is plutonium.
And if you remember, we were taught what the Chechens were in Ukraine, the terrorists, the ISIS fighters.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know if you ever look up a movie called Dirty Wars. It was like a BBC movie about these terrorists. They made these they took like old radioactive things. They turned into a bomb, and it's an older movie. It's from the 90s, I think. If you ever look, it's called Dirty War.
All right. Well, listen, Dustin, we got to take a commercial break here. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back with more news after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to take one more phone call before we get into this war of words between Mitt Romney and Donald Trump. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Happy New Year, Mike. Hey, question. Actually, I think Dustin, it might be the movie he's talking about. Dirty Wars is by Jeremy Scahill. I believe that's the movie he's talking about. Jeremy Scahill, Dirty Wars. I think that's the movie he's talking about. Question on the border wall. I'm trying to find a reliable source, a reliable number of how much has been donated so far to the GoFundMe wall. Any idea?
I haven't looked recently, but apparently Ted Nugent's getting ready to hold a charity concert to raise even more money and get the thing started. So, the American people want this wall. And I'm watching on Fox News right now, Schumer and Pelosi, they're in front of the cameras. They just finished their meeting with Trump. And it's looking like no progress was made whatsoever. And Schumer's out there pounding on there saying you shouldn't use the shutdown as a hostage. And, just out there trying to make it look like this is all Donald Trump's fault. And it isn't. It's the Democrats' fault for not going along with improving our border security. And what's really interesting, there are videos out there of both Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi from years ago in which they're out there fully in favor of improved border security. And so this is not really about borders or immigrants. This is about Democrats versus Republicans. This is about Chuck Schumer and Pelosi wanting to damage Trump on this as much as they can. And while all of this faction fighting is going on, our country is being allowed to sort of rot away on the vine.
No, I couldn't agree more. This GoFundMe wall for the border wall is actually kind of shameful. It shames the Democrats who obviously don't want to keep us safe and protect us. And you're right. I think it was 2006 or 7. They were all for the border wall when Obama was their president, but now that Trump's the president, they're going to go against anything he wants. And actually, I think this is going to backfire on them quite a bit.
Here's the problem. They have discovered as of both 2016 and especially the last midterms, they can get those illegal immigrants to vote. They're not supposed to, but there's no mechanism in place to prevent it. So the Democrats want those borders open. They want the country flooded with illegal immigrants because the illegal immigrants overwhelmingly vote Democrat because they want free stuff taken away from the legal American citizens and handed to them, and that's what the Democrats are campaigning on. By the way, I just got a note from Mike in the control room. As of right now, the GoFundMe page is $18,653,438. So that right there, I think, is a measure of how much the American people want that wall and how the Democrats are just totally dismissive of legal American citizens' concerns because apparently we're not useful enough to them. We didn't vote for them enough.
Right. That's it for me, Mike. Appreciate it. Have a great show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And let's see. Rand Paul is now weighing in on the shutdown. So it looks like the shutdown is going to continue, and it's going to be annoying for a lot of people. And anyway, over the weekend, Utah Senator-elect Mitt Romney, who was a candidate some years back for president, basically wrote this blistering op-ed in which he just attacked Trump's character, questions his honesty and integrity, accuses him of damaging America's reputation abroad, and Bush. And he wrote an opinion piece basically saying that he doesn't see any way that Trump can be removed from office with the legal impeachment process. He said the evidence isn't there to do it. And The House could impeach just to be nasty, but like with Bill Clinton, the Senate would refuse to convict. What Steinberg is saying is that he is thinking Trump will be forced to resign. Right now, there are 17 different investigations directed at Trump, members of his family, the Trump organization. They're digging for anything they can find, and the deal will be made that Trump will step down as long as he and his family and his organizations are given immunity for whatever it is these investigations are going to find. And I feel sorry for you, Donald, but you did want the job. All righty. Now, apparently, when the new Congress convenes tomorrow and Nancy Pelosi is presumably sworn in as the new House Speaker, they're planning to pass a spending bill with no money for the border wall and send it to the White House to put Trump on the spot to either sign it or veto it, and then they can go on saying, see, this is all Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump who's causing this. And Pelosi is out there predicting that corporate media is going to support the Democrats in making this all about Donald Trump. Not that all that many people are still watching corporate media. But what we are watching, what the American people are watching, is how it's become pure politics. It's pure gotchas. It's poking each other in the eye. It's nonstop campaigning and fighting with each other, and nothing's really getting done for the nation and its people. Now, photos are starting to get posted all over social media about how garbage and refuse are starting to overwhelm the national parks because the trash is not being collected. The groundskeepers are not keeping the sites clean here. And, of course, the media is out there saying, oh, what a terrible thing to be doing to our country. And it is. It is. But again, Donald Trump promised the American people border security. The American people want it. That 18 million that's already in that GoFundMe file, that is people voting with their wallets here. Now, only a year ago, there was a poll conducted by Harvard University, which indicated that the majority of Americans, including Democrats, want that border secured. 80% of all voters, 68% of all Democrats. So the Democrats are turning their backs and ignoring not only the American people as a whole, but their own rank and file, their constituency, just like they did back in 2016 here. Now, Larry Klayman penned out an interesting little article. It's over at the Renew America website. And he titled it, unfortunately, 2019, the Year of Bloody Revolution. And I hope he was just kidding about that. But he goes on down in this article about just how unrelenting and vicious the Democrats have been in trying to find some way to get Donald Trump out of the Oval Office. Then they'll get Mike Pence in, then they'll investigate Mike Pence and get him out, and who knows who they're going to put in there. Now, Nancy Pelosi cannot become the president if Trump first goes and then Mike Pence steps in, because he will then get himself a new vice president. The only way Nancy Pelosi could become president, and I'm sure she's thought about this, she's the definition of power mad. Something would happen to Donald Trump and Mike Pence all at the same time. And then under the rules of succession, the Speaker of the House becomes the president here. All righty. Now, a little bit of good news for the Donald. Apparently, one of the attack groups was trying to use a Freedom of Information Act request to get Donald Trump's tax files from the IRS. And they work through an organization called the Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC. And a federal judge, Judge Karen LeCraft Henderson, ruled that the Electronic Privacy Information Center cannot use a Freedom of Information Act request to access tax documents. Nobody is allowed to inspect or demand someone else's tax records. This applies to the protection of confidentiality for the ordinary taxpayer and the president alike. So that one has been kicked out of court here. Now, speaking of kicking out of court, Rudy Giuliani, who's President Trump's lawyer, has gone very vocally public in his support of Julian Assange, saying that basically there's no grounds to prosecute him because he was just the communicator. And what he communicated was stolen documents. And he went back to that case of the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers were stolen property. They were stolen from the Pentagon, actually from Rand Corporation, and given to the New York Times and the Washington Post. And of course, Nixon filed charges against both newspapers, and nobody went to jail. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that, yeah, news organizations have a right to publish this information in the public interest, that the public media, the mass media in this country exists to serve the governed, not the governors. So basically, that's what Assange was doing. And Giuliani is saying, you can't put Assange in a different position. You can't convict him for doing exactly what both the Washington Post and the New York Times were acquitted of doing. So that's probably going to go all the way to the Supreme Court as well. Apparently, Robert Mueller's office attempted to delay the court hearing on the $350 million lawsuit brought against their office by Dr. Jerome Corsi. Now, if you don't remember, Corsi brought the lawsuit because the Mueller investigation illegally searched his phone records and tried to coerce him into lying in exchange for a lenient sentence. Corsi is thus demanding an investigation into Mueller's overly aggressive tactics. So Mueller's office cited the government shutdown as their excuse for requesting a delay for the hearing. And the judge said, no, this can definitely go forward. All right, we have another caller on the line. Joe in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Happy New Year, Mike.
Happy New Year.
I wanted to talk about this clown Romney. And, I mean, boy, he didn't. Yeah, has he been sworn in yet? I don't think so. But,
no, that's
In
tomorrow.
a way, it's a smart move. Yeah, in a way, it's the smart move for him because he is a liberal Republican. He is a neocon. And if the first guy, he's out of the box. Corker's going, Flake's going. So he's going to be the face that you're always going to see on Good Morning America and Meet the Press. He's going to be the face of the Republican neocon backstabbers who are orchestrating basically a soft coup against Trump every chance they get. So I can see why he did it. I think that the hatred for him by Republicans now is going to be immense. And Mormons might suffer for that, who knows, but just as like the traitor aspect of what he's done to the populist Republicans will never be forgiven, but it can be understood because he's a snake. He's always been a snake, and he's making the snake move, and he will be rewarded by the snakes in the media and the whole snake establishment. So it's very like, once you see what happened, it's pretty obvious that this was going to happen. I kind of knew when he got elected that this was going to happen, so it's happened. And the snake has become a snake, and that's what I've always said about Trump, in that he really highlights the opposition. You know, they get exposed whenever they attack Trump. They show who they really are, which is in a way a good thing. And I've always thought, no matter what you think of Trump, that's his best asset, is his ability to expose the people around him, whether you like them or not.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a video that we posted to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and it's titled simply "When Mitt Romney Came to Town," and it was a video that was produced by his campaign opponent back when Again, I think it was 2012. And it basically talks about Mitt Romney's business practices, where he basically would go into a town, he'd buy up, the companies that were there, then he'd strip them of assets and sell it off and put all those people out of work. And he made a lot of money very quickly, but he was never interested in actually running the business to run a business. It was basically Wall Street's form of piracy. Capture the company and take it apart and loot and plunder it. And I noticed a member just put up another article about Mitt Romney's character. But something, at this point, it's hard to find anybody anywhere in the government that is of good character. Dr. Ron Paul, Cynthia McKinney, and the rest are all poseurs and sociopaths. In fact, considering the state of the country and how close we are either to a war that could go nuclear or a total economic collapse, you have to wonder what sane individual would run for Congress or the White House, knowing that they're going to have to deal with that.
Well, what I see with Romney, and I don't understand, is he will be destroyed now. There's one thing that I like about the populist side is because of the way we get treated and the way we're mocked and the way we're silenced and the abuse that we take, it actually makes us smarter. I mean, if you look at the guys at 4chan and a lot of the fringe groups, they're very brilliant people in digging stuff up. And, it's like this new stuff with the 9/11, somebody hacked and got Larry Silverstein's records, and they're threatening to put them out. And I think it's 19,000, and now they got the FBI on it because, of course, the FBI will be used to silence any information, and they'll threaten anybody that would publish it. That's what the FBI will do.
Well, I'll tell you what I think. I'm very suspicious about this hacker story because it's showing up at virtually the same time as this grand jury has been impaneled to look into evidence of explosives used in the building. And I think this whole hacker thing is being set up as a distraction to keep people from paying attention.
You want me over for the break?
Yeah, okay. Stay on the line. Right, we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're still talking with Joe in Tennessee. Joe, you said you had one more thing you wanted to...
there's been word that last week cleared one of the federal courthouses, 5 floors of one of the federal courthouses in Washington, D.C. And rumor is it has to do with Mueller probe. But maybe it has to do with the 9/11 information because it supposedly involves a foreign corporation. Maybe that corporation is AIG, who were the people that insured the World Trade Center. And supposedly that's what this Dark Lord information pertains to, the suits with Larry Silverstein and AIG. Now, AIG got paid off when they had those issues in 2008. And I think that was a back channel way to get them to hush up about the 9/11 fraud and paying off Larry Silverstein. But I think that that could be something's going on with all this. Now, I really think that something big. I think I forwarded you that thing about the letter at George Bush's funeral. And since that time, you really haven't heard anything from the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bush family, Biden. They've all kept a real low profile. And I just think something's up. I think from their expressions in that whole incident, and just the way Trump acts, very cocky and confident, like he's holding some pretty big cards. I expect some very big news to be coming out. That's just my vibe. I hope it's true. I hope we can see justice to these bastards. I'd love to see frog marches of all these big establishment insiders and most of the FBI and Department of Justice traitors. And maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but why not? It's a new year. Why can't we be positive, right?
Okay, no problem there.
Anyway, thanks for the call.
All right, thank you for the call, and Happy New Year. We're going to let you go. All right, getting on here back to the news, and you knew this was going to be inevitable with the Democrats taking over control of the House of Representatives. Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is planning to reintroduce a bill that would create a committee to look at financial compensations for blacks. Slavery reparations. Now, no black alive today was ever a slave, other than that we all are to that 1040 form. And no white person alive today was ever a slave owner. So, again, this is Sheila Jackson Lee trying to buy black votes with your money. Seems like the Democratic Party, that's all they've got to campaign on anymore. Vote for us, we'll give you stuff. Okay, over in New York, there is this group called the Association of Black and Puerto Rican Legislators Incorporated, and it's a caucus of black New York state lawmakers, and they run this charity whose stated mission is to empower African American and Latino youth through education and leadership initiatives by providing opportunity to higher education. And as it turns out, an investigation by the New York Post found they haven't given a single scholarship to a needy youth in 2 years. They spent it all on food, limousines, and rap music. All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, in the context of Xi Jinping approaching Donald Trump about improving U.S.-Chinese ties, and I said it's going to be very difficult between the South China Sea, support for Taiwan, and, of course, the trade war. And apparently, Trump's chief China tariff negotiator, Lighthizer, is saying more tariffs may be needed. Well, that's definitely not going to calm the situation down here. All right, we have a caller on the line, Dan in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Happy New Year and all that.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, every morning, when I get up, I go through the YouTube videos on my TV, it's better than watching the news. And I seen this one where these two guys were antagonizing this woman, and apparently she had her husband killed in 9/11, and they were laughing at her and all that until her son and another guy came up, and then they took off running down the street. It was really hilarious, actually. But what's scary is the one guy had on his sweatshirt, AK Press. It's something you need to look up. AK Press. It is just nothing but communist literature. It's really scary, some of the stuff that these people are reading. And that's where their mindset is. They're total hardcore communists.
Or they could be really agent provocateurs. There's a lot of people who are being paid to go around our society pretending to be something, to serve a political agenda. And it doesn't mean they're really that way. But you have to be very, very careful that you not assume that people who are behaving badly are what they seem to be at their face. We could see people.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. Okay.
So, this guy, he got fired from his job because everybody looked him up, tracked him down, traced him.
Okay.
And, his employer said it was undesirable, his viewpoints and stuff, and the way he acted in public. But you got to look up that AK Press and look at some of the stuff that they are selling, and these people are reading. It's they're getting the hardline commie stuff. I mean, hardline commie.
Well, we don't know how many people are reading it. I mean, sometimes, we've seen social media inflate their viewership and readership. Back in the 1930s, when the Anti-Defamation League was first getting going, there was actually an American Nazi party, and they were getting all kinds of press. Ooh, the Nazis are here. The Nazis are dangerous. And it turned out they only had 6 members, but their job was to put on their costumes and pose for the newspapers and look mean.
Yeah, well, you got to think too. When these people are out in the streets, they're calling everybody Nazis, and that tells me that that to me that says that they're leaning very far left. But that's the kind of literature that they have on this site, stuff from way back when. It's kind of an eye opener, seeing some of this what they're putting out on the market for people to read.
All right. Well, listen, Dan, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Get on back to our news.
Okay.
Bad news for Tesla. They missed their fourth quarter delivery numbers, and that was despite the incentive for customers to buy before the impending loss of the $3,750 car federal subsidy. The U.S. government was subsidizing the purchase of Teslas because they want to get people into electric cars here. So, not looking good over there. Very informative article. This is out of Investment Watch blog. Actually, it's from Naomi Prims. And it's looking back over the last 10 years and figuring out that the post-Great Recession economic recovery was largely reserved for people in the financial markets, not the majority of ordinary Americans working longer hours and multiple jobs. In other words, all of the financial help that came out after the crash of 2008 went back to the companies that caused the crash of 2008. And you got stuck with a bill. As I said before, it was a disastrous holiday shopping season. Somebody wrote in and said, well, it was 5% higher than last year, to which I replied, 5% better than last year's disaster is still a disaster, and you have to factor in the rate of inflation. But here are the stores that went bankrupt this last year. David's Bridal, Sears, Mattress Firm, National Stores, Gumps, Brookstone, Rockport, Nine West, Claire's, the Walking Company, Bon-Ton Stores, Kiko USA, and Agachi. And I'm sure that there'll sadly be a lot more. Right now, they're still fighting over whether Sears has to go into immediate liquidation or not after the failure of finding a buyer. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We have been hearing about the term of de-dollarization for quite some time. And this last year basically saw the global geopolitical space split into two camps. One camp are those who still support using the U.S. currency as a universal financial tool, and the other camp are those who said, no, it's time to move on. And this is being fueled by global tensions caused by economic sanctions, trade conflicts, and it's forcing these targeted countries to take a fresh look at alternative payment systems currently dominated by the U.S. dollar. So, over in India, they're ranked the world's 6th largest economy, and it's one of the largest merchandise importers. And it's not surprising that India is directly affected by most global geopolitical conflicts and is significantly impacted by sanctions applied to its trading partners. Now, earlier this year, Delhi switched to ruble payments on supplies of Russian S-400 air defense systems as a result of the U.S. economic penalties introduced against Moscow. Over in Turkey, President Erdogan has announced plans to end the U.S. dollar monopoly via a new policy that is aimed at non-dollar trading with the country's international partners. And Erdogan announced that Ankara is preparing to conduct trade through national currencies with China, Russia, and Ukraine. Turkey is also talking about a possible replacement of the U.S. dollar with national currencies in trade transactions with Iran. See, if it doesn't go through the U.S. dollar, the sanctions can't be enforced. Now, over in Iran, of course, as you know, they kind of got whipsawed. They got that P5+1 deal in 2015. The sanctions were dropped, and Iran started trading. They started buying and selling stuff and making money. Then, of course, Trump comes along, pulls the U.S. out of the P5+1 agreement, and reimposes highly punitive sanctions. So sanctions have forced Tehran to look for alternatives to the U.S. dollar as payment for its oil exports. And Iran clinched a deal for oil settlements with India using the Indian rupee. Same thing is going on over in Russia. President Putin is saying that the U.S. is making a colossal strategic mistake by undermining confidence in the dollar, and Putin is absolutely correct. So, early this year, Russian Finance Minister Anton Sulanov said the country had to dump its holdings of U.S. treasuries in favor of more secure assets, including the ruble, the euro, and precious metals. And the country has already taken several steps toward de-dollarizing the economy due to the constantly growing sanctions introduced since 2014. Putin is absolutely right. The U.S. is destroying its own dollar hegemonic domination with all this abusive behavior. Meanwhile, China and Japan have inked a bilateral currency swap deal. So they're going to be settling their accounts without going through the U.S. dollar as well. Now, John Rappaport has an article out, and it's basically titled, "Where's the $20 trillion? And then he puts right at the very top of the article, note, we're not talking about the 20 trillion national debt. This is a different 20 trillion. And it should be making pension fund managers very nervous. And apparently this came out of the revelation that there's a black hole in the government. Catherine Austin Fitts did an analysis and said over the years at least $20 trillion has gone missing, unaccounted for. And a large part of it went into the military, and apparently a lot of it vanished into housing and urban development. And when you see ordinary Americans who are struggling just to get by, and then you look at the reckless and cavalier manner in which the government handles their finances, I'm sure that's got to be irritating to a lot of people. Another article, this one came out of Peace Voice, saying that the United States is first in war. Nobody doubts that. In 2017, the U.S. government accounted for more than a third of the world's military expenditures, more than the next 7 highest spending countries combined. Despite that, President Trump and Congress pushed through a mammoth increase in the annual U.S. military budget last August, raising it to $717 billion. So maintaining the U.S. status as #1 in war and war preparations comes at a high price because other areas of our economy are being neglected. They're being defunded. The roads are being left to fall into disrepair. Bridges are on the verge of collapse. Dams are on the verge of collapse. The infrastructure is in very, very poor shape. We have been on a war economy for all these years. They didn't want to use that phrase, but that's exactly what it is. Plundering every bit of wealth inside the country to put into that war machine. So that's where we are. And I think it's probably going to get really, I think this is the year we're going to see the war get going. I know that vested interests in the military-industrial complex want this to be another Cold War because that's all about, making money. We just keep waving the enemy at the American people, and they'll keep turning over their money, and it'll get spent on very expensive and not very effective weapon systems, along with the usual contributions to members of Congress who will help divvy out those defense contracts. Now, this is a little bit alarming. Apparently in Berlin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel told an audience that sovereign nation states must not listen to the will of their citizens when it comes to questions of immigration, borders, or even sovereignty. And she said this at an event by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Berlin. Now, Merkel has already said she won't seek re-election in 2021, and it is clear she's attempting to push the globalist agenda to its disturbing conclusion before she stands down. But what a thing to be out there saying that sovereign nation states should not listen to the will of their citizens. So right there, it's anti-democratic. And that tells us the New World Order will be equally anti-democratic. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. A couple of things. You are 100% correct. While these Congress people and Trump are acting like children throwing food at one another, the American people are being neglected. Where's the infrastructure? What about the housing for the homeless or other people? What about our debt? And I could go on and on and on. So the American public, we are being neglected by these Congress people.
Yes, we are. They're just all wrapped up in themselves and their little political games and, their moments on the camera. And we've lost control of our own government between the illegal immigrants voting and the massive election fraud taking place throughout the entire system. I'm sure most of these career politicians are running around the Capitol building saying, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. We don't have to listen to those dumb voters anymore.
Right. And the other thing, I know I do support the wall, but I have to blame the Republicans because for the past 2 years, they have control of the White House, the Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And you mean to tell me you cannot come up with $5 billion? And last week, Mitch McConnell, he said even if you use the nuclear option, there's still there are Republicans who would not vote for it. So that tells me you can't find 51 senators in the Senate, and the Republicans control 53 seats. That tells me the Republicans do not want to spend money on the wall.
Oh, well, first of all, it's going to take 60 votes in the Senate for the spending bill.
No. If you use the nuclear option, you only need 51.
Okay. Well, again, given how this government spends money willy-nilly everywhere else, again, this border wall has really become an issue. It's all about Donald Trump, and it's all about rigging elections, and that's where it's going. And ordinary Americans are being injured by this. We're seeing, again, more illnesses coming into this country that had previously been eradicated.
Right. Now, did you see the article over the weekend, what happened down in El Paso, Texas, what ICE did?
Now,
did you hear about that?
Are you
what happened?
Go ahead.
Apparently, there were like 1,600 illegals. They were at this detention center, and what ICE did in the middle of the night, they got I think 10 or 12 different buses, and put the people on the buses, went down to the center of El Paso, Texas, and just dumped them off. And these are illegal immigrants.
What the? Well, I'd heard about the story, and their excuse was they'd simply run out of room. But I mean, this situation is totally out of control.
Why didn't you just drive them across the border and dump them?
Good question. I would have done that.
Same here, but you don't hear anyone criticizing ICE. Trump has been very quiet regarding that. I would have thought he would have fired somebody.
I would have expected the same thing here. Now, they are making a big deal about that incident over the weekend on New Year's down in San Diego, where the migrants were trying to climb over the fence and they were hurling rocks at ICE and the other soldiers there. And ICE responded by using tear gas against a specific area where the rock throwers were on high ground and hurling the rocks over the fence. And of course, the corporate media is out there trying to make it look like, oh, bad ICE, oh, those poor migrants, they were subjected to tear gas. And again, if those migrants don't want to deal with tear gas, they shouldn't be there.
Right. I understand that situation, but to dump 1,600 illegals downtown El Paso, Texas, and they're running around, you don't know if they're criminals or not. Something should have been done about that, and someone needs to be fired. I really do believe that.
I absolutely agree. I mean, where are they going to put all these people?
Well, that was another problem. They said when they tried to take them in, certain organizations, there was not enough room at the hotel, at the housing project, at a lot of centers. So I don't know, but that's something you don't hear anything on the news about.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, I will let you go. You take care.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and let's see. Was that Jim in Chicago? Okay. All right. So the phone lines are now open again. And we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting on over to Europe, where they're still dealing with their open borders issue. Apparently, 4 refugees from Afghanistan, Syria, and Iran were arrested following unprovoked attacks on a dozen people in Amberg. 9 people in total had to be treated in hospital for injuries sustained in the attack. Now, the arrested men were placed in different prisons after attacking 12 people at random in Amberg. The 4 perpetrators are 17 to 19 years old. And apparently this all began Saturday at 6:30 in the evening. One of the refugees first kicked Nino M., who's only 13 years old, for no visible reason. Kicked her in the stomach and then hit Marco S., who's a landscape gardener, 29 years old, in the face. Now, remember a while back we had something like that going in this country. It was called the knockout game, where people would just run up and punch random people in public places, and I'm glad that went away. But it kind of makes you wonder what's gone wrong with the human race, that we seem to have lost the concept of civility and mutual respect. Alrighty, last February, there was a cruise ship, the the Baltic Queen, and this 25-year-old African man committed a rape. Well, apparently he received a severely reduced sentence, short sentence, and no deportation, since he was fired as a trainee teacher because of the crime. So, anyway. Apparently over in Melbourne, down under, a gang of African thugs were hurling rocks at police as officers arrest 6 youths over a wild brawl with Vietnamese shop owners who bravely fought back after the gang of African thugs tried to rob their stores. And apparently the Vietnamese shop owners were fighting off the thieves using chairs. All right, we already mentioned this briefly when we were talking with Dustin. At least 3 volleys of tear gas were launched onto the Mexican side of the border fence near Tijuana's beach from the U.S. side early Tuesday. This is from Associated Press. And Associated Press was saying the report affected families including men, women, and children who arrived last month. Now, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection said in a statement that the tear gas was actually aimed at rock throwers on the Mexican side who were preventing U.S. agents from assisting children being passed over the concertina wire. Apparently, they bundled up the kids with all kinds of padding, and they literally just rolled them across that concertina wire and dropped them onto the other side of the fence. Apparently 25 migrants were detained on Tuesday. This situation, it really totally is out of control here. Now, this year the FBI has barred a record number of cases of illegal immigrants from buying guns. They're doing background checks on these guys, and apparently the National Instant Crime Background Check System listed 836,600 illegal or unlawful aliens as of 2018, that number is, of course, increasing. And those are only the ones that apply for permission to buy a firearm. So illegal immigrants rank at the top of those on the FBI's prohibited category. I wonder if that's what they're calling the 10 most wanted list here. Now, I did mention this earlier in the show. Ted Nugent, who, as you know, is a rock and roll star, he's going to throw a benefit concert to raise money to help build the border wall. And he's going to use his influence in the world of music to put together a music festival that he claims will rival Woodstock. It will be 3 days, and he's hoping it will attract conservatives rather than liberals, who will do more than dance around drinking and doing drugs. So they're thinking that they can raise no less than $50 million. And if they can get the project started, there is a law saying that federal projects cannot just be dropped without the permission of Congress. Okay, down in Louisiana, a police department down there, Harahan Police Department, put out a Facebook post declaring that some of the region's methamphetamine... Oh, and there is our next commercial break. We got... Okay, we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And from the wonderful world of political correctness, over in Sweden, state TV actually put out a show that sought to explain why there was no father of Jesus. And they actually came on out and said that the Virgin Mary cloned herself and that Jesus was transgender. Now that, of course, is not exactly how the story is described in the Bible, and anybody who understands genetics would know that if Mary had cloned herself, a heck of a trick for a Bronze Age goat herder, this child would resultingly be female. So apparently SVT is out there pushing this thing and claiming that it was the birth was parthenogenesis. But I mean, that's really getting out there. That is really getting out there. All right, over at the University of Missouri, and best known for torpedoing its own enrollment rates after campus protests led a professor to threaten a student journalist. Apparently, they're now pushing this idea that any male student who is physically larger than the female student he is asking out may have violated the school's Title IX policy because his physical size gave him power over her. So that's the latest one from the world of political correctness. You can't ask out the short girls. Meanwhile, over at the University of Oklahoma, they actually have a college course. It is a feminist James Bond course to study the legend, the history, the movies, the books of James Bond from a feminist perspective. And there's even talk that just like the current Doctor Who was feminized, that the next James Bond ought to be a woman or a transgender, because Daniel Craig is currently filming the last James Bond movie he has committed to do, and he's interested in moving on now. Okay, we have a caller on the line here, John in Vancouver. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi Mike. Happy New Year to you and Claire. I have been listening to the broadcast from the beginning. At the end of the last segment, you were started to say something about some mess that had some laces, and it went to zzz, and then you got cut off. So I don't know. I listened to the radio feed on a cell line and also on a hard line. So I wonder if you could just finish
Oh
fleshing
yeah,
out that story.
yeah. What happened
Hang
with
up.
that is this police station in Louisiana put out a Facebook post saying that methamphetamine in the neighborhood had been contaminated with the Zika virus, and that concerned meth users could bring their drugs down to the police station for testing or arrange for a visit to their home by the police. And it was a complete hoax, and you can't contaminate meth with the Zika virus. It was just complete nonsense. Now, I don't know if they're going to start arresting all those people who showed up, because meth is illegal in that part of the world. But yeah, it's a pretty bizarre story.
Okay, it's funny because it's kind of like those concert tickets they mail out to people that are on the wanted list, and they show up for the free
Yes.
concert and get arrested. Yeah. What I wanted to talk about, Mike, is just I don't know if you know what the way Australia treats people that roll up onto the shores of Australia unannounced. I don't know if you're familiar what happens to those people.
Not really, but I imagine it's probably a lot less wonderful than what happens here in the United States.
Well, exactly. I mean, notwithstanding, Australia is an island, so to get there uninvited, you have to get in a boat.
Yes.
But, just to the north of Australia, you've got Indonesia. It's 120 million people, and then you've got various other Pacific islands and whatever. And through the 70s, after the Vietnam War, and through the 80s, there was a huge amount of people that came to Australia, and they were called boat people. And Australians said, no, we are not going to stand for this. So because everybody in Australia has to vote, the government sort of goes along with what the majority of the people in Australia want to happen with their country. And so they made some very tough laws. They declared all of the outside islands of Australia, in the north of Australia, not part of the immigration zone. And then they set up some two islands, Manaus Island and Nauru. So if you rolled up to on the shore of Australia, you actually weren't in Australia, and they sent you off to these islands, and then you could then make your claim from those islands. But the one proviso they said is that you will never ever, even if your refugee claim is successful, you'll never ever be able to come to Australia. And so what has happened now in the last probably 10 or 15 years is that nobody comes to Australia via the boat. And there's actually a lot more, not draconian, I just think sensible policies in regards to people that just come to your country and then you have no control over. And you know what? And then the funniest thing is that you don't hear one word about how mean or nasty or bad the Australians are taking care of their own borders. I mean, it's quite a contrast.
Well, when I was down there in Australia, and first of all, most of the people there, they thought they were a continent, not an island. And by and large, they were very nice people, about as polite and charming as the Canadians are. And again, a little object lesson that there are parts of the world where people still do behave rather decently. But as far as the immigration issue is concerned, how lucky for Australia that they have those northern islands, that they can basically just sort of cut off and say, that's where you're going to stay, when you stay here. And it would be nice if we had something like that here in the United States. Although if California goes ahead and secedes, we'll just build a wall around it. And all the illegals and refugees that come to this country will just fling them over the wall and let California deal with them, since they seem to love them so much.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. It's a shame that you can't choose. I mean, and what happens in Australia that we do get the best and brightest, or they do get the best and brightest, and that they have vacancies for certain skill sets. And as a refugee or as an immigrant, you get fast tracked. If your skills are in demand, you
Yes.
get to you get fast tracked to the front of the line.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me. The problem here in the United States is because of automation and offshoring. There aren't jobs available with skill sets. It doesn't matter how clever the refugees are. I mean, I know there's this big push for more H-1B visas. All of it, of course, is harming the American worker. And I'm wondering how much more the American worker is going to be able to tolerate.
Yeah. It's a shame. Anyway, Mike, again, all the best for the new year for you and Claire, and I will hang up and keep listening.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Randy in Ontario. Aloha, Randy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Happy New Year's. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
I want to throw a few things out and see if you can help me understand. I understood Vitmo was expanded for an extra 1,400 beds in a hospital, and there's like, I don't know, almost 1,000 military down there. That's one thing. The other thing is like the voter fraud. Like Trump knows about that. I understand maybe there was water droplets on the real ones, and he knows which ones weren't properly done. He knows about the voter fraud. So I understand it's pretty bad. No one of these families that received the letters or the envelopes at the wives at the funeral of HW, nobody's been heard from since. They've also heard about 2 military barges of jail barges have gone down to Gitmo, fully loaded, and the 4 military guys around Trump that were let go, they could be on the panel down there to start doing these military tribunals. Can you talk to me about anything I've mentioned?
Well, I mean, it's certainly fun to speculate about, but the fact that Trump is now 10 for 10 for announcing he was going to do something and then backing off of it, I don't think so. I think the deep state has won this one. I do know there are a lot of high-level people who are getting out of the government right now because they may be seeing a coming collapse and they don't want to be caught in that mess. I would love to see these tribunals arrest these people and give them a fair and honorable trial. I don't think it's going to happen. I think what's going on is that we are still taking people out of these Middle Eastern war zones and carting them off to Guantanamo because they're an embarrassment to the United States. That's why that Camp X-ray is still there. There are people in there who have scars on their bodies showing that far worse things were done to them than waterboarding. And they can't ever be seen in public again.
Waterboarding. The other thing about that is Trump's only been there 2 out of 4 years. He has over 340 or 360 people that they won't let him get into his cabinet, that have been sitting there for a year, 2 years, because the liberals just won't do anything to help him do anything. Yep. So he gets blamed for nothing happening, yet they're the ones that are causing the problem.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, the corporate media is going along with them and trying to spin it that, Trump's the one who, Trump is being irresponsible. Trump is refusing to listen to his advisors who are so much smarter than he is. Well, all those advisors are pushing for the exact opposite of what Trump campaigned on. They're pushing for more wars. They're pushing for more corporate giveaways. And Trump is a disappointment. There's no question about it.
Well, I think we should wait till his 4 years are up for make a total judgment. He's only halfway through it. He's been stopped at everything he's tried to do, pretty much. He's still got things done.
Well, why
can't he hire 330 people he wants? They're all acceptable to be in there to work, and they won't let him to bring anybody in.
If the Hill is correct, they're predicting Trump will be gone before the end of 2019. That'll be forced to resign.
Can you do that?
Well, apparently the deal is there are now 17 active investigations into Donald Trump and his family, his wives, his children, his organizations, and all they need to do is come up with something and say, we're going to throw your wife and your kids in prison over what we found here, and the only way you can get out of that...
Use a different hand, the wife is behind or something? Is that how silly it is?
It's hardball politics is what it is. And the idea will be that Donald Trump will voluntarily resign from the Oval Office in exchange for all prosecutions against him.
His family.
Yeah.
To protect his family,
To protect his family, yeah.
Yeah, just like what happened to Flynn.
Yes.
Because they were threatening to go after his son. I'm positive about good things happening. I'm praying. I just totally think that something good has to happen because this negativity is garbage.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree.
Embarrassing in North America almost.
All right. Well,
I hope that things work out good in the long run.
Well, I'd like that to happen
it.
too here, but I think things are going to get worse before they get better. Anyway, Randy, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we're going to get on back here to the news. Now, interestingly enough, earlier this or middle of last year, up in the Yakima area, there was this Confederacy of Haudenosaunee, an assembly of First Nations Canada, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the Yakima Nation visited the Vatican and petitioned Pope Francis to rescind the doctrine of discovery. Now, the doctrine of discovery was created in a papal bull by Pope Alexander VI, who was the wild one. Used to throw orgies inside the Vatican. And basically it declared that any Christian coming upon land inhabited by non-Christians had the authority to simply claim it all. And he handed this out in 1493, and it went primarily to the advantage of Spain and Portugal, which were major seafaring nations of that era. And they sailed to the Orient and promptly declared, this is now all Christian land. So it would be a symbolic gesture, but the First Nations could run into the same problem we've run into here in Hawaii, in which the UN and international law are agreeing that this nation was illegally annexed and turned into a state, and a lot of the property simply stolen, but there's no way to undo it all. There was actually a land title company that was set up briefly that was conferring land titles based on the pre-annexation records, and it just created a whole huge mess until finally the state government simply said, no, the current land titles are the current land titles. And even those are a mess, as Mark Zuckerberg is finding out over on Kauai. All righty. The CDC is out there warning of a new respiratory virus that is attacking both children and adults. They're calling it RSV, for respiratory syncytial virus. And RSV starts out with symptoms that are similar to those of the common cold. Most people will recover in less than 2 weeks, believing they only had a cold. Some symptoms are coughing, wheezing, loss of appetite, runny nose, and a fever. They're very similar to those of the common cold. And most people have actually had RSV before possibly believing it to be a cold. So apparently RSV can spread when an infected person coughs or sneezes. And you can get infected if you get droplets from a cough or sneeze in your eyes, nose, mouth, or if you touch a surface that has the virus on it, like a doorknob, and then touch your face before washing your hands. It can also spread through direct contact. Okay, we're going to take another break for a commercial here, and more about science and health when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And setting aside that warning about this respiratory virus, which doesn't sound like it's all that serious anyway, if it amounts to being about the same as a common cold, right now parents across the country are starting to get very angry with the CDC for its apparent failure to act on this mysterious polio-like virus, which has left hundreds of kids partially or completely paralyzed since 2012. It's killed at least 2, and it's expected to hit unprecedented levels in 2020. Now, the CDC is calling this acute flaccid myelitis, and it's described as polio-like. But when it first showed up, it was being diagnosed as polio. And everybody wondered, where did this come back from? And one of the concerns that was raised was that one of the now mandatory vaccines children must have to go to school is the polio vaccine. And there has in the past been an issue where the attenuated pathogen used in the vaccine can return to full potency inside the patient after it's administered. And we've seen this with a lot of illnesses where the vaccines that are supposed to protect you from disease will actually give it to you. So I think this is a huge cover-up. I think CDC knows exactly what's going on, and we will never hear one word about it. Up in Oregon, there is a major hepatitis A epidemic spreading through the homeless population. And Oregon health officials are concerned about it because it just seems to be working its way through the homeless population in the state. The homeless population in more liberal and socialist areas are seeing a major rise in outbreaks of the cases, as California is already experiencing. So, again, while the politicians in Washington, D.C. squabble and fight their little political fights and scream about open borders, our nation is in decline here. Little interesting story here. The United States Food and Drug Administration is now admitting that certain popular medications can cause life-threatening breathing problems in kids. And they're cautioning against medications containing codeine and tramadol, saying these opioid drugs can cause life-threatening breathing problems in children, particularly below the age of 12. And some children and adults break down codeine and tramadol into their active forms faster than other people. This can cause the level of opioids in these people to rise too high and too quickly. They also warn that breastfeeding mothers who are taking these narcotics may pass on unsafe levels to their nursing babies. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. We have a caller waiting on the line, and we'll be back with hour number 3 of our show. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Jim in Michigan. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Happy New Year there, my friend.
Happy
great
New Year
show.
To you too. Thank you.
Well, I was going to mention, Jonas Salk. We know him as the father of the polio vaccine.
Yes.
And what he did was do a dead virus, okay? And if you look at his testimony before Congress in 1976, he stated at that hearing that all polio in the United States or wherever around the world was caused by the vaccines since something 1955. So he knew that.
Okay.
And then you have Albert Sabin, who Jonah did the dead virus, okay, and then Albert Sabin did the attenuated virus. It was weakened to a certain point, and it was actually outlawed to sell its polio vaccine because if you look back at the empirical data of the polio vaccines, Idaho and Iowa had to stop the vaccines. They actually banned everybody from even having the vaccines. The Sabin vaccine was what they were pushing at that time because there was so many new issues as far as paralysis.
Yes.
That they'd never seen before. So they actually stopped the inoculation of polio because it was actually causing so much paralysis. So whether it would be Jonas Salk or Albert Sabin, we still have their vaccines. And it was a thing called the Cutter incident, which is a pharmaceutical company out, I think, California, where they were producing the Albert Sabin vaccine, the attenuated, but they ended up infecting 76,000 men, women, and children. So the polio vaccine never worked. Again, polio was used to be called a summer's flu because people get it and they get a little sniffle or something. There was some paralysis in some cases, but and there was so many cases of polio years ago that didn't cause paralysis or anything until the vaccine was introduced. So I'm thinking that this new stuff that they have right now is actually caused by a vaccine.
The vaccine manufacturers are protected from civil litigation. If you're harmed by a vaccine, you have to go to the vaccine court, which has paid out billions of dollars in settlements. The corporate media won't touch the issue of vaccine safety because they are very dependent on advertising revenue from the big pharmaceutical corporations. And as far as our government agencies that are supposed to be keeping an eye on this stuff, they're not. In fact, there was that article that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came out with about, I think it was a month ago, where they were looking at the agency that was supposed to be in charge of vaccine safety testing and discovered they hadn't been doing the testing for like 30 years. And
look at what the Italians
it's a racket.
Did. They fired their board, Yes, it is a racket. And again, I'm in total agreement. But the thing is, most Americans don't realize that there is no litigation you can bring against pharmaceutical companies for bad vaccines, and there's no incentive for the vaccine manufacturers to actually test their product, and they don't. There's no test at all on vaccines. They do it for every other thing, and I think we're only one of 3 countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise, and I think we ought to really get rid of that because it's creating no truth gets out. If you have a truth, like there's so many of these doctors, alternative doctors right now that are being killed, and anti-vaxxers and what have you like that. It might be a dangerous game even to be anti-vax, but you know what? It doesn't matter to me. I'm anti-vax totally. But anyways, I really appreciate your show, and you have a lot of really great callers. And Happy New Year, and I hope your lovely bride is getting better too, Mike.
Slowly but surely she is. And, we have some errands to do this afternoon right after the radio show. So thank you for the phone call. Happy New Year. We're going to let you go. All righty. Obamacare is back in the news, and apparently built into it is something called the Hospital Readmissions Program. And what it basically meant is it started with the observation that hospitals were treating lots of people who would then return for more treatment within the month. And unnecessary readmissions cost Medicare an estimated $17.5 billion a year. If hospitals were treating people effectively, the thinking went, those people shouldn't need to return so soon. So the health law instituted a Medicare payment penalty for hospitals with too many readmissions for things like pneumonia, heart failure, and heart attack. And since 2012, Medicare has assessed about $2 billion worth of penalties on hospitals with too high readmission rates. And the problem is that the patients are being turned away, and some of them really are in need of readmission and treatment. But it's really just, it's a factory, and it's all about the money here. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who just now rejoined our network. And we have another caller on the line, Mark in Georgia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I was wondering, as well informed as you are, last I heard of you, which of course was last year, as in a few days ago, Sears was basically they had their head in the guillotine regarding the lack of somebody to buy them out. And,
yes.
I'd be willing to put up $1.50 for them, but I'd be losing $1.50 because they're so deep in the hole. If I understand correctly, basically a hedge funds manager bought up Sears for the purpose of basically using it to create a lot of money for himself. Is that correct?
Well, that's very common among hedge fund managers. And as I said before, if you look at that documentary about Mitt Romney, that's how he made most of his money as well. And it's a very predatory behavior. But then for money junkies, it's just sort of the way business gets done. But as far as Sears is concerned, my last understanding is they failed to find a buyer, and that Sears will now be going into complete liquidation at some point in the near future.
I'm just wondering if that means that there's going to be some real bargains about now the Craftsman name brand that used to be Sears only. Now Lowe's is taking it up because not Walmart, but Kmart was carrying the Craftsman brand for a while. But
yes.
I don't know. What I've heard, Kmart is also kind of on the way out too.
Yes.
So Lowe's is the one place that has where the Craftsman brand will live on, even though there's a lot of Sears employees that I imagine if there was past any pension funds, they've long since been absconded with. Correct?
Okay. Our phone connection kind of got flaky. Can you repeat that last part?
Okay, Sears employees, like people that work for Sears 20, 30 years, there should be pension funds available to pay their pension. And now that Sears has gone belly up, I guess this is a subject for further research, is the people that work for lifetime employees that work for Sears and have now retired, are their pension funds been absconded? That's the subject of research is all I'm saying is, look, maybe you want to check into that because basically there needs to be some kind of accountability if somebody stole their pension funds to feather their own nest, right?
Well, or if they were simply misappropriated within the corporate structure, which has happened in times past, or the pension fund may have been defunded because of the crash of 2008. But to be very honest, I don't know what the situation is between Sears and their pension funds. I do know that under the current bankruptcy laws, the secured investors are first ones at the trough, and employees are dead last. So we'll see what happens.
I understand. Well, you're in my prayers, and I wish that meant something to you, but,
well, it means something to Claire.
It's one of those things. It's an honest disagreement. What's that?
I said it means something to Claire.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. I just, to me, the creator is the being to whom we're ultimately accountable. To call him a playmate is too much like lowering God. But, I understand where you're coming from because I've dealt with people that, they use religion for their own, to advance their own careers. I think that's one of the things that turned Karl Marx off to religion is when he was a child, his family converted, and that word in quotes, to Christianity for the sake of business connections for his father. And when he saw that this was not motivated out of any kind of love of God or any kind of religious or philosophical reason that had to do with business connections, it put a bad taste in his mouth. And to people like that, I understand where you're coming from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense here. Anyway, listen, Mark, thanks an awful lot.
Anyway. All right, later.
Later. Thanks a lot. Happy New Year. Okay, there we go. All righty. For the first time ever, there has been a comprehensive project studying Americans and glyphosate. This was done out of the University of California, San Francisco, and it basically found that 93% of Americans have glyphosate in their bodies. And remember, glyphosate has been declared a probable human carcinogen by the World Health Organization. And I'm sure the cancer industrial complex is already out there rubbing their greedy little hands together saying, ooh, money, 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 money. But this stuff has really become ubiquitous. It's being sprayed on crops in the farm fields. They even spray it on crops right there in the store because it acts as a preservative. It's being sprayed on various paper products. Same reason, makes the product last longer. And it's become so ubiquitous again, 93% of Americans have some amount of glyphosate in their bodies. That is very, very dangerous. Okay, over in the EU, they have issued a ban on X-ray body scanners in all European airports. And they have done so for health concerns. And they're basically going to be enforcing the ruling across all 27 members of the nation. And they declared the prohibition is necessary in order to not risk jeopardizing citizens' health and safety. Now, while the level of radiation from these backscatter radiation machines is low, studies have found that over time, a small amount of cancer cases could result from scanning millions of people a year. I remember when these scanners first came on out, and there was a story that came and went about how all of a sudden at Logan International Airport, at the boarding gates, at the security zone, there was a cancer cluster developing among the workers there. Alrighty, over in the Congo, in the city of Benai, apparently 24 patients have escaped from a treatment center, which has triggered an emergency search. And complicating things is there's demonstrators in the streets of the city angry at being excluded from voting in the weekend's elections. So that could escape. That could get on out there. Here's another one. This is from a study published by the Canadian Family Physician, says that more than half of Canadian doctors still use manual devices to check for blood pressure, which increases the risk of misdiagnosis. There are now automatic electronic devices that are able to detect small changes in a person's blood pressure and may be more accurate, but they are also more expensive. And the research further claimed that using the stated technology has led to 20% of people undergoing treatment for high blood pressure when they're perfectly healthy. And the lead author of the study, Janusz Kasiłowski, said this is due mainly to the fact their blood pressure was improperly measured. Well, maybe not. Now, when we take Claire to the doctor, she always asks for a manual sphygmomanometer, because if they use the electronic machine on her, it always reads higher. And when they use the manual one on her, it always reads lower. Now, I remember many years ago when I was down in Australia, and I had to go see a doctor, and the doctor took my blood pressure, and I said, I know it's high. And he said, what makes you think that? I said, well, my doctor back home told me that. And he said, oh, you Yanks, you set your standards too high. And I actually did a little research where I looked around in various countries around the world as to what is considered normal blood pressure, and it's all over the place. Depends on who's selling what blood medication here. Okay. Let's get into the world of computers and social media. Facebook has a secret censorship rule book, and apparently they have thousands of slides of banned hate groups, phrases, and emojis that 7,500 lowly paid moderators are supposed to use to police 2 billion users. And Facebook is out there laying down which political groups can use their platform in every country on earth. This came out of a New York Times investigation. So these 7,500 lowly paid moderators, many of whom work for contractors who also run the call centers, enforce the rules for 2 billion global users with reference to a baffling array of thousands of PowerPoint slides issued from Silicon Valley. And apparently employees often use outdated and inaccurate PowerPoint slides and Google Translate to decide if users' posts should be allowed on the social network. So it's really slapdash. And while Facebook is out there making sure that you're not saying anything that's double plus ungood, apparently smugglers are using Facebook to lure illegal migrants to illegal routes to Britain for up to £10,000 per person. And the traffickers boast about how they can help people from Africa and Asia reach Western Europe without being caught. And even after Facebook said it had improved its security measures, the Daily Mail found a range of illegal activity on Facebook. So again, their focus is on liberal politics. India wants tech platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and Google to remove content it deems unlawful within 24 hours of official notice, and to develop automated tools which would proactively identify and remove such material. This is coming from BuzzFeed. And the rules would also require companies to break end-to-end encryption to allow the government to snoop on all communications. So mass surveillance is coming to India. Apparently over at WhatsApp, they have a small problem with child porn. Google and Facebook's ad networks funded apps that led users to groups on the private messenger that are dedicated to swapping illegal images. You know, but by golly, we're going to get those Trump supporters and those global warming deniers. We'll take care of them. The former CEO of Reddit is confirming that internet traffic metrics are very often fake, and they're overstated or totally fabricated. And they've been caught doing that for a long time. But those metrics are what they base their ad revenues on. And if they are inaccurate, if they're inflated, if they're the result of using clickbot networks, then these companies are cheating their advertisers. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And this, of course, being the start of 2019, everybody's making predictions. And that includes IBM, who is predicting that trusted AI and quantum computing will take the center stage in 2019. And they're predicting major breakthroughs will lead enterprises to increasingly advance, scale, and trust artificial intelligence. Well, I would not be sure about that, because at least around here, the Weather Channel, which uses IBM's Watson, is pretty much useless. And I remember last week going into the New Year's holiday, they were forecasting overnight thunderstorms, no thunder, no rain, clear skies, could see the stars. And it brings me back to a question that I asked before. The whole point of AI is it's supposed to be learning about what it's computing. But how do we know what it's learning is the correct thing to learn? That's where the danger lies. We've heard of some really weird experiences with AIs that develop their own language, that all of a sudden start saying humans should die. And it makes a nice sales pitch, AI. Same thing with quantum computing. But I don't know that it's really the whiz-bang they're trying to convince us all is. Of course, I think everything after the Commodore Amiga is decadent anyway. All right, another story, this one coming out of the Independent in Great Britain. Apparently, the small, tiny size of TV cameras, which are getting smaller and smaller all the time, are creating a problem, because peeping Toms are installing clandestine cameras in rental or student properties or public spaces, including toilets, swimming pool, cubicles, changing rooms, and tanning salons, basically to get pictures of people naked without their consent. And apparently there is a growing market for voyeuristic material. That little extra sense of sin that the person didn't know about this when they were being photographed. Now, this is kind of weird. Google has been granted permission to roll out wearable hand motion sensors that allow users to swipe, scroll, and click their devices through thin air. Now, concern remains the devices could interfere with other electronics, but this technology is called Project Soli, has been in development since 2015. Worn on a user's wrist, it allows the user to scroll, swipe, click, and control the devices with simple hand gestures. And apparently there are radar beams that track the movement of the user's hand, enabling precise control, just like Tom Cruise used in Minority Report, or Harry Potter uses when he does what he does. But apparently Google wants to put the technology into phones, personal computers, and vehicles, and they've been given the go-ahead here. Another place they've been given the go-ahead on has to do with facial recognition tech on users without their consent. A federal judge has thrown out the lawsuit that alleged Google's non-consensual use of facial recognition technology violated users' privacy rights, allowing the tech giant to continue to scan and store their biometric data. Now, the lawsuit was filed back in 2016, alleging that Google violated Illinois state law by collecting biometric data as biologically unique to users' fingerprints without their consent. And that data was harvested from their pictures stored on Google Photos. The plaintiffs wanted $5 million in damages for hundreds of thousands of users affected, but the judge basically threw the case out of court. So Google gets to go on scanning you and doing whatever they're going to do with your biometric data. Now, this story, I think, is a little questionable. We talked about this briefly earlier in the day, and it's getting a lot of coverage. It's getting a lot of coverage all over, which is another reason to wonder what's really going on here. But this hacker group, the Dark Overlord, insert ominous music here, claims to have hacked into secret documents stolen from insurers and government agencies that they claim will reveal the truth about 9/11, and they're holding up the government and the insurance companies for ransom. And apparently this group claims the documents tell the story of what really happened. Tweeting will be providing many answers about 9/11 conspiracies through our 18,000 secret documents link. They even published a teaser consisting of letters, emails, and various documents that mention law firms. Now, my question here, I'm suspicious of the timing. Only 2 weeks ago, we found out there will be a grand jury impaneled to look at evidence that explosives were being used on the World Trade Towers. This feels like an attempt to divert the media, to divert attention. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. This next story is a little out of place in the talking points. It should have been further up there with that story about how the FDA is now admitting that some popular medications can actually be dangerous for children. And again, it goes back to that whole opioid situation. So we're looking at this story out of cuzblue.com. There have been 9,000 U.S. children killed by opioids and heroin since 1999. Now, apparently, they're conflating the data from the medical profession and the street dealers as well, but still 9,000. And apparently, overdose death rate tripled among kids as the youngest started to get hold of their parents' pills, while teenagers turned to street drugs. So where is all this opium coming from? It's coming from Afghanistan. And that's a big reason why the U.S. will never leave. That and the oil pipeline right of way here. Now, SpaceX had a launch on Sunday, and they lofted up a trio of satellites about the size of toaster ovens from a startup called Hawkeye 360. And these satellites are going to be scanning for pirate radio. They don't have cameras, they're not looking down with optics, but they're listening to the radio spectrum. And basically, it wants to capture radio frequencies down below, searching for pirates and maybe terrorists. Well, that's got to be one heck of a scanner inside there. Anyway, this Hawkeye 360 was one of 35 paying customers strapped on the top of the Falcon 9 rocket. And this includes a Honeywell satellite to relay messages from tankers at sea, always a useful thing to have. A company called Odyssey that is building a system to speed communications among satellites, and the Nevada Museum of Art, which is launching an orbiting sculpture meant to be visible from Earth. Well, that's going to be kind of interesting here. A lot of interesting things going on in space. New Year's Eve, the OSIRIS-REx had its encounter with Bennu, a near-Earth asteroid here. And it's now basically slip into orbit around this asteroid here, but there's still a lot of prep work to do on that. The big one, though, was the New Horizons spacecraft did the flyby of Ultima Thule. And this Ultima Thule is a Kuiper Belt object, and as they were getting closer and closer, they started to get multi-pixel images, and they determined that the object was kind of elongated. Well, the first images are coming in from the actual flyby and show that it's actually two spherical objects that have sort of just drifted together. Now, because of the extreme distance and the power involved in the radio, the data bandwidth, the data rate is very, very slow. And so we're not going to get to see the high-resolution images until next month. But everyone started saying, it's a snowman. It's a snowman. They did have a big New Year's Day celebration at NASA, and they got Queen guitarist Brian May to record and then perform a song. The song featured audio of Stephen Hawkins. And you probably remember this guy. He was the guitarist behind Bohemian Rhapsody, but he's also a doctor in astrophysics. Boy, there's a Renaissance man for you. So that was kind of interesting to see that happening here. As you know, a lot of times the U.S. and Russia have occupants up on the International Space Station, and they all show up with their own spacesuits. And according to Der Standard, which is part of the German media, they're saying that NASA is way behind Russia in the development of spacesuits. And basically saying that as long as they're having to take rides with the Russians to get up there, they might as well go ahead and arrange to use the Russian spacesuits because they're so much better. Now, the spacesuits used on the ISS were developed more than 40 years ago, and their 15-year-old design is very outdated. This is from NASA itself. So where's the money? Well, it's over there, bombs, bullets, and butter here. NASA's InSight lander has deployed its first instrument onto the surface of Mars, and this is the seismometer, which they have located a very flat area and deployed it, and the images show this copper-colored covering faintly illuminated in the Martian dusks. And so they're going to start listening and see if Mars is seismically active. Now, there were earlier seismographs on earlier spacecraft, but apparently this one is very, very, very sensitive. And they're now moving on to the rotation and interior structure experiment. And it's using InSight's radio connection with Earth to collect preliminary data on the planet's core. That will be very, very interesting because there's one school of thought that Mars lost its atmosphere and its water as the result of a tremendous asteroidal impact. And the impact point was the Utopian Plain. And on the opposite side of Mars, you have the Tarsus region with all those volcanoes that just shoved up. if you actually look at it from a topographical point of view, Mars is lopsided. And so if they can get enough seismic data to start looking at the interior structure, we can determine if that is in fact what happened. And Al Gore can stop lecturing us that we're going to turn into Mars if we don't stop using plastic shopping bags here. Okay, a lot of bits and drabs here. This is sick. Okay, there's this Catholic priest. He's 73 years old. And apparently he had more than 2,000 photos and videos of child pornography on his computer and his phone. He's been sentenced to 25 years in prison, which, starting at 73, that's probably a life sentence. The guy's name was Thomas Fauscher, a well-known priest in the Roman Catholic Diocese of Boise, will not be eligible for parole and must register as a sex offender. So Fauscher pleaded guilty to 5 felony crimes after investigators found all these images along with chats about raping and murdering young boys. And just outrageous behavior, just outrageous here. Over in Egypt, archaeologists have discovered the tomb of a priest dating back more than 4,400 years in the pyramid complex of Saqqara, south of Cairo. And it's a new discovery. It's a private tomb. It's not royalty, but apparently it is intact. It's never been looted. They're saying it's exceptionally well preserved, colored with sculpture inside, and it belongs to an official high priest. The tomb belongs to a priest named Wati, a high priest who served during the 5th dynasty reign of King Neferkari. So it's never been looted. That's going to be the biggest find since Tutankhamun. Okay, apparently over in Africa, the number of animals who are on the list of endangered species keeps growing, and recently added the Kordofan giraffe and the Nubian giraffe are now considered critically endangered, even though there's been a slight uptick in their numbers. But they're on that list here. Meanwhile, Congress has agreed to make it easier to kill sea lions, threatening fragile runs of salmon in the Northwest. I remember back when Claire and I lived in Washington State, that was always a big thing. The seals would come on in and just help themselves to those migrating salmon, leaving much less for the salmon fishers to grab. And there was always this contest about, can we shoot the seals? No, they're protected. But apparently, wildlife managers are saying sea lion populations have grown so large, they're no longer to be put under the protection, which began in 1972. And the measure would usher in a more streamlined process for Washington, Idaho, Oregon, and several Pacific Northwest tribes to capture and euthanize the sea lions. Okay, now, getting on back to the International Space Station. A while back we had this story where all of a sudden alarms started going off inside the ISS indicating a leak. And the leak was traced to one of the the Russian spacecraft that were attached to the outside to be used as an emergency escape vehicle. And they discovered there was a hole drilled inside the hull, which was allowing the air out. About a week ago, the Russians went out on a spacewalk, and they peeled back the insulation and the anti-meteoroid levels, and they took photos and measurements. And now the Russians have come on out saying they've concluded the hole was drilled from inside the spacecraft. And apparently Russian law enforcement agencies are investigating what might have happened. It's not known if it was drilled before or after launch. If it was drilled after launch, that's going to be a big, big problem. So let's talk about GMOs here, because the U.S. Department of Agriculture has come out with their final rule for GMO labeling, and frankly, it is pointless and it's confusing. Under the final rule, a food producer marketing a food that is genetically modified or that contains GMO ingredients may comply with the rules in any one of 4 ways. By clear wording on a food label, you're not going to see that one happen. By using the USDA's new symbol, which is a circle around the rim, it says bioengineered. Doesn't say GMO, it says bioengineered. They can comply with a QR code printed on the food label, which is the way I think probably most of these companies are going to go, because how many of us carry around a QR scanner on our phones or think to use it when we're buying food? And the 4th way that they can use this is to basically give the consumer an option to send a text message to the manufacturer seeking more information. So this is basically useless. They've deliberately made it confusing. It's obfuscated. It's a pain to use. And I can understand why a lot of GMO activists are concerned about that. Okay. Down in, well, actually Washington, D.C., there was this activist, anti-GMO activist, Mila Demir. She's from Key West, Florida. And she's been found dead in the swimming pool of a Washington, D.C. hotel just hours before she was due to submit a petition with over 200,000 signatures to the EPA. Now, a lot of people are wondering about this story because this lady, Mila, was the nemesis of the GMO industry, especially GMO mosquitoes. And already suspicions are being raised that this was not an accident, because the witness who found her floating in the pool and phoned it in didn't try and get her out of the pool. Didn't try performing CPR. Just called up the police and said there's a body floating in the pool. And that was it. A lot of people involved in health advocacy meeting untimely ends here. Over at NBC, Chuck Todd has basically announced on air he will no longer give airtime to climate deniers who refuse to support the religion of human-caused global warming. So that's it. NBC saying, nope, only want one side of the story. Bernie Sanders, a little while back, came on out with an article claiming that climate change is just like a military attack, which prompted a huge Twitter firestorm of mockery and criticism, including comments like, nuke the sun. Okay, this next one, I actually agree with this. California done something I think is pretty cool. California is becoming the first state to ban pet retailers from selling animals that are not from rescues and shelters. And outgoing California Governor Jerry Brown signed these regulations in his last term that go into effect. Well, they went into effect yesterday. And the idea is to encourage pet stores to use these rescued animals instead of having these puppy mills crank out puppies for the pet stores. And the puppy mills have a reputation for being rather inhumane. And this new law, Assembly Bill 485, also requires the pet stores keep records for each animal and post a signage listing the shelter from which each animal was received. And I think that's a really good idea, because most animals who are in shelters, if somebody doesn't adopt them, if they're not brought home, they get euthanized as well. And I know this is going to be a hardship for all these people who have puppy mill businesses, but maybe they can get into some other form of livestock raising, because the facilities would be pretty much the same. But I think I'm in agreement with this one. Okay. Do you remember James Bond, which one? I think it was Thunderball, where he escapes from an assassination using a jetpack. Jetpacks have always been very popular. They've been around for a long time. But there is now a company called Jetpack Aviation, which markets the first commercially available jetpack. I don't know what it costs, but they're getting ready to launch the world's first jetpack racing league this year. In other words, they're literally going to organize races between people wearing their jetpacks and offer up prizes and who knows what all else is going on there. All right, we're going to take a break here, our last commercial, coming back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, our first show of 2019 here. And I think most people would like to feel more positive about events going into this year. New Year's is supposed to be a time of renewed optimism after getting through the last one. But all of these articles I'm reading about the economy and about politics and about the wars, I think we're in for a very, very rough year. And I really don't know what to expect. So earlier today, prior to his meeting with Schumer and Pelosi, Donald Trump held a press conference. And he came on out and he did something that was really quite unpresidential, if you want to call it unprofessional, and that was he dissed Mattis. And regardless of how you feel about Mattis personally, when you're the president, there's a certain decorum, formality that you're expected to go through. But I've noticed of late, Trump is getting snippy. It started out kind of on Twitter. Now it's migrating into his real life. And I'm not so sure about that, what that means here. Apparently, Donald Trump was talking about Jeff Flake now that he's retired. Oh, he's probably going to go to work for CNN. And Trump was basically talking to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer because they were talking about the Pope's comment about not having walls. And Trump said, the Vatican has the biggest walls of them all. And they do. I've been there. I've seen them. And responding to Mitt Romney's op-ed, Trump said if Mitt Romney would have fought Obama as hard as he'd fighting me, he would have won the election. Well, I guess Mitt has learned his lesson. Okay, boy, those poor people over in China, what they're dealing with here. Apparently, there has been an outbreak of African swine fever, and so far, 650,000 pigs have died since last August. This includes direct victims as well as culled animals. And apparently it's spotty, but it's all over China, and they have a right to be concerned. Almost reminds me of that movie Contagion, which I thought was a real fun movie, except for the part where they just went on the attack against bloggers. I'm sorry, I've got the hiccups, and I can't get rid of them. Okay, so 2019, a lot of bad news for the retail, a lot of bad news for the economy. Apparently, Apple got hit. Apparently, they're having problems with their new wireless charging pad that was supposed to be out a year ago. But apparently, Apple was forced to cut its revenue for the first quarter, largely due to that slowdown of business in China. So everybody's getting hurt by these tariffs and these trade wars. American farmers, Apple, people in Europe. Almost reminds me of Rodney King. Can't we all just learn how to get along? All right, there's the music. Time for us to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of useful stuff to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to What Really Happened. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.